Hello and welcome to productlessons.com, a podcast channel on building software products and not just building products, but talking and evaluating businesses around products. So if you're listening on YouTube, but you rather prefer to listen on audio only podcast, you will find us on SoundCloud. Search for Yours Productly. The link is in the description below. In YouTube, I categorize my episodes into different sections. Today's episode is under product entrepreneurship category, where we talk to product founders. Before we proceed, I would ask you to click subscribe, because when more people subscribe, YouTube helps me reach out to more audience. All right, with that, let me introduce my accomplished guest today, Arvid Kahl, who has quite a following in Twitter and someone I have been following quite religiously. And that's exactly why I pursued him and I requested him to be on my podcast. Now, Arvid co-founded Bootstrapped and sold feedbackpanda.com, which was the name of his Bootstrap company. It's an online teacher productivity SaaS company, and that he started with his partner, Danielle. And he writes regularly on the Bootstrap founder, because according to him, bootstrapping is the desirable value and wealth generating way of running a company. And still, many people shy away from it. And he has been sharing the learning from his journey over the last decade in his guide, Zero to Sold. In the years running Feedback Panda, he learned how to run a self-funded company, and he encourages other entrepreneurs to see bootstrapping as a viable option. Not every business needs a VC to succeed, he says, and he claims that most businesses are better off without investor expectations. So with that, let's welcome Arvid.
All right. Hello there. Hi.
Hi, Arvid.
Thanks so much for having me. Wonderful. Thanks. This is really cool. I'm super looking forward to our conversation today.
Same here. I've been counting days backwards, and I said I've been following your Twitter feed regularly. And your book especially created, just magnified my impression of you. I was just mentioning this to a mentor friend of mine. He is an author too, but your book just blew away my impression of you. The reason is it's so in depth and it's so exhaustive. It's not a book that you wrote hurriedly. You every chapter of it is worth the time to spend, and it's somewhat complete. So it's not like a book that misses on a lot of aspects of entrepreneurship. So thanks for writing that book. And we'll be talking about that book. But the book, as I said, is so exhaustive, we cannot be talking about the entire book. So we would be talking on areas that I found interesting and maybe relevant to my audience. My audience is mostly product leaders, product managers. So I thought, so your book is divided into like 5 sections, right? Bootstrapping, preparation, survival, stability, growth stage. But for this interview, I would focus on preparation, which is on 2 parts: idea to product and product to business. But before going to the book, I'm very curious to know about you. So tell us a bit about your career trajectory, and that would be a good foundation for the conversation today.
Right. Yeah, career. That's an interesting question, right? Because everything nowadays is kind of a very wound path. But I used to be a software engineer. Maybe that's how I should start with this. So, or I still kind of am, because never really stopped being a software engineer or a coder. But I always was a coder, I guess, from like 9th grade in school when I got my first computer until today, I guess. But I did study computer science at the university in 2003, somewhere here in Berlin, in Germany, where I live right now. I dropped out of that because studying was interesting, but actually coding projects for people was more interesting. And I did more of that and less of the university. And while I learned a lot, I didn't get a degree, but it didn't really hold me back, because there was enough, let's say, like work to learn from outside of university, particularly in Germany, which is very technical. And when it comes to university studies in computer science, when they teach you something, usually that's like already 5 years old. So doesn't really give you much in terms of marketability for yourself. But I kind of dropped out. And I think World of Warcraft was also a big problem for me at that point. So there's a reason that I didn't go to university much, but I could work from home, right? So it kind of worked. I studied something completely different a couple of years after. I went into political science and philosophy because I wanted to learn the exact opposite of something technical. I wanted to be involved in something social, which was very interesting because you learn a lot of things in these softer, more social sciences that are highly applicable to dynamics between people that can be easily applied in an economic or in a marketing kind of perspective. It's quite surprising what something as abstract as philosophy can later down the road give you some insights that other people may not. So it can be an unfair advantage. I also dropped out of that one because I really didn't like the academia part too much, but I did like the applying the knowledge kind of part. And I did drop out of the second one because I actually got a Twitter DM back in 2011 from a Silicon Valley company that found a project that I had on GitHub, some open source code that I had published because I was trying to just build with some new technology that was out there that was pretty new at the moment. And they saw that and they had the same tech stack, and they said, well, you seem like you know what you're doing. Do you want to work for us? So all of a sudden I had a remote Silicon Valley position at that point, had that for a couple of years, and I learned so much more just from the couple of weeks of interacting with these people than I had from years of studying at a university. So at least when it comes to just the applicability of knowledge, being in the trenches, you cannot beat that, right? It's not theoretical, it's highly practical. So that's kind of what got me going on this journey of being a professional software engineer. I stopped working for them at some point. I started consulting, freelancing with my own time. And most recently, I think the last job, like real job that I actually had before I co-founded Feedback Panda with Danielle, was I was working for a company in Hamburg, in Germany, which is around 3 hours or maybe 2.5 hours away from Berlin, where I live. And I had a half remote, half presence kind of job. So I had to go to Hamburg, commute to Hamburg 3 times a week, which 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back is 5 hours a day, just commuting. And I did this for 2 years almost. So that's 15 hours a week of commuting. And that's commuting in a train, right? Where I'm just sitting there and doing nothing. Or pretty much where you can't do anything because in Germany, the wireless is super bad on the train and you can't really do work. So what I did this whole time was reading and listening to podcasts. So I kind of took everything in, the whole entrepreneurial podcast scene, every book I could find on indie hacking, on building a business, on marketing, all these kind of things for years. And that then led to me finally being able to have a more successful attempt at building businesses. I had a couple attempts in the past, but they didn't really go too well. But after this episode of learning a lot, it worked out. So that was 2017 when we founded Feedback Panda. And I guess that would be my resume, if you can call it that, right?
Excellent. So let's since you mentioned about Feedback Panda, why don't you share the story of Feedback Panda briefly? It seemed like you wanted to solve something for your partner, right? Who is the English teacher.
Yeah, pretty much. Danielle was teaching English online. She was working from home because she had a leg injury at the time. She's an opera singer. She's a trained musician, right? Usually a singer would go out and sing, but if you can't move, you kind of have to find a job that you could do from home. And that was obviously 2017, long before the COVID-19 kind of lockdowns that we are kind of forced to endure at this point. That was something where remote work wasn't really necessarily that well established, particularly in the non-technical fields, right? In education, remote was not a thing, but there was a couple of companies in China that, with the digital infrastructure becoming ever better, started to understand that you could teach so many Chinese kids how to speak English online by just finding people from North America who speak English natively and have them connect through a virtual classroom. That was already there in 2016, 2017. And Danielle did this for a living. She taught like 10 hours a day, just sitting in front of her computer, teaching kids who didn't speak a word of English or very little English without herself speaking any Chinese. That was it was fun, but it was a lot of like dancing, a lot of singing involved. And
Right.
that's a stressful job. But that's not the only stressful part. So the stressful part, and that's also the thing that led us to build the business, was that she needed to provide student feedback, like actual couple paragraphs of text for the parents of the student to read. And she needed to do that for every single lesson that she taught. And if you teach 10 hours a day, that's 20 lessons. And trying to remember who you taught what in what lesson and what they need to work on after the fact, like when 10 hours are over, that's you can't really do that without going at least partially insane. So what most teachers did, and all of these teachers kind of did the same thing. They taught the same classes, just to different students, highly organized curriculum. They took notes, and then after they taught for 10 hours, they spent 2 more hours writing the text and then submitting it. And they had to submit it because if they didn't, they wouldn't get paid for the teaching itself. So here was a problem. Danielle was clearly suffering from this because she was losing 2 hours of unpaid time every day. And we knew that all the other teachers, and there was like 5,000 to 7,000 of these teachers in this one school already when Danielle taught there, they had the exact same problem. And she started making her own little templates in a Word document, in an Excel sheet. And I just, at some point, we talked, and she said, can we deal with this in a better way? And having built SaaS platforms and software products before, I said, yeah, this looks like a perfect situation to turn it into a custom product with custom logic that can amplify all these processes and make it so much faster. The result is Feedback Panda, a tool that integrates with those classrooms that all these teachers have to use to work, and turns this 2-hour after the fact job into a 5-minute job that can be easily done in between or once you're finished, saving people's 2 hours a day. Quite a significant improvement, and people were willing to pay for that. And we just built a business right from that product alone.
Got it. So by then, I think you had solidified your intuition or your knack of finding problems worth solving, right? Because not everybody would jump into identifying and trying to solve it. Yeah. So this is a question that I always had. What does it take for an entrepreneur, or what kind of a mindset one should have to be able to identify problems that are worth solving? Because that should have a monetizable proponent to it, right? So how does one develop that?
I would think I've been doing this for, I guess, like 10 years or something now, and with varying ranges of success. In the beginning, I had a lot of cool ideas, and I built things, and nobody needed them, nobody wanted them, and sure, nobody paid for them. Right? Always this kind of, I guess, very engineering-driven perspective where I work with products every single day. This thing is a product. This computer in front of me is a product. Everything is a product. So all I think about is products. I think about building an app, building some software, without actually understanding that the product itself is just an implementation of a solution to somebody's problem. And in this equation, I think many engineers in particular, people who come from the technical fields, they go at it the wrong way. They start with the idea of the product, and then they try to figure out, well, is this really solving a problem? And if so, who may have it? It's like a lot of guesswork in between. What I found to work much better, both for me and for the people that I've since mentored and consulted for, is just flip this whole equation around and really start with people. Like, try to figure out who you want to help. That is the most important part, because it doesn't really matter how you help them, as long as you help a certain group of people. Let's call it an audience, for the lack of a better term. If you find this kind of potential group of future purchasers, just people with problems, then what you need to build and how you build it is almost secondary, because that will come from you just introspecting and figuring out, observing what problems do they have, how do they usually solve their problems, how can I solve them better, and how can I do this in a way that doesn't mess up their workflow. So and I've been talking about this in the book, and you said it, like the book is spread into like 5 parts, and the preparation part is like almost half the book in size, because it's such an important step. It's like, if you don't get the first step right, then you can try to build a business out of this as much as you want. You can waste your money on marketing if the product isn't good, because it doesn't really solve a critical problem for a well-defined audience. then you can build a great product, but everything else isn't there, right? A great product that nobody wants to buy. So I think the kind of question that you ask is like, do you need some sort of special perspective or personality? I think you just need the right strategy. And the strategy is, for me at least, what I've seen work better than the other approach is to really focus on finding an existing group of people out there. And that might be, it doesn't have to be a market, right? It doesn't have to be the indie hacker community. It's great if it is, but it could also just be people who like warm showers. As random as is an example, right? If you can build something for those people to have a more enjoyable shower, then all of a sudden it turns into a market for your particular solution to their critical problem, which hopefully is, I want to have a nicer shower, right? You need to really start with the people, figure out what their critical problems are. And I guess with this audience is a bit of a bad example, but let's just say plumbers. It's also, I think, an example I use in the book because it's such a nice, real job, right? Plumbers, people who do pipe fitting, who, just take care of the plumbing. What problems do they have? Well, without asking them, you will never know unless you're a plumber, right? So if you have a plumber in the family, ask them. If you have a friend who works in plumbing, either as a plumber themselves or as somebody who works in the adjacent fields, like the logistics, people selling to them, or people who hire a lot of plumbers, like hotels or what's it called, hospitals. All of these kind of groups of people have interests and they need problems solved. And without talking to them, you will never figure out how to build a good product or have a good idea, because if you need to solve a critical problem. And that comes from observing an audience.
Got it. Thank you. In your book, you say that, and I'm just quoting you, it says, I think that everybody can be an entrepreneur and create a sustainable business that will allow them to live a life of freedom and financial independence. It will require some sacrifice, as building a business will take a lot of work and time, but it will lead you to a life of control, a life of choice, and a life of opportunity. Could you, very enticing, could you elaborate? And the reason I say this is because 9 out of 10 businesses fail, and we hear success stories, but there are a lot of stories where people have burnt their fingers and have had financial turmoils. So how do you reconcile the two here?
Yeah, to me, it's very much about the journey and not just about the attempt. Because my journey in particular consisted of many, many attempts, some of which were kind of successful. I have an example here. I founded a company with a couple of friends, and we had customers, paying customers for a product that was in the journalism, photography journalism space, like people uploading images to a lot of agencies. And then we made big mistakes in terms of marketing and just running the business kind of into the ground by not having a vision for it. The product was good, and we had paying customers, but the business still faltered. So you learn from that. And then I built a business here in Berlin with a couple friends, trying to get local food from outside the city, good locally grown food, into the city of like what is 4 million people who only have access to like food from out of the country, I guess, that is cheaply imported. And we wanted to make this a more locally connectable thing. And we built a product. We built a product that kind of worked for the people buying, but we kind of forgot the other side of the market, the people producing. We built a SaaS product for farmers who never went to their computers. So how could they ever like really type in their inventory if they're always kind of farming the whole day? That's what they did. That was their job. So we forgot to validate the product. And that was a big learning. So ever since then, I've been much more focused on validating the product. And the same with the other business. Ever since that experience, I've been much more focused on understanding that there needs to be a vision and some sort of marketing perspective. So I'm not saying that if you start a business, you will guarantee, that will guarantee you success immediately. You may have to start a couple of them and get through the learnings of each individual one to get to a point where you may have some success. I think what I'm trying to explain here is that everything you do exposes a bigger plot on the opportunity surface of your life, right? You have this kind of potential of opportunities, and you start out coming out of school with, I guess, very little practical experience. And with everything you do, you kind of get a new plot across this plane. And opportunities strike in random points at random times. So being prepared for this and having understood certain concepts, either through reading, through conversations like this, or through actually having gone through that, that prepares you to act on this at this very moment. What I also want to say, a life of control and a life of choice, that's, I guess, is the bootstrapped part. That is the part where you don't necessarily go for venture capital funding. Because many people, particularly here in Germany, it's a big deal to do. If you have a startup, you better get venture funding, or else you're not a real startup. That is one of the biggest problems that I see in the local community here, particularly in Berlin, where there's a lot of VC-funded startups. If you want to bootstrap, people don't take you seriously. And I think that is changing, because people understand that bootstrapping just really means trying to see if the business you're building can quickly generate revenue to be self-sustainable. And if not, it's not a good idea. You don't do it anymore. You do something else, which is why a lot of bootstrap projects are also side projects, but people still have a job. I was explaining that I had a job at Hamburg. Well, Feedback Panda existed already for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe even half a year before I quit my job there. Like, we had a 5-figure monthly recurring revenue when we quit our jobs, both me as a software engineer and Danielle as a teacher, respectively. So you can do this on the side, and you can build a business just to see if it works. Because even though you may have found your audience, their critical problem, your solution, and then built a product, it still may not be enough. There still may have been a validation that you didn't do in between that catches up with you. But that's kind of it's about this journey, the entrepreneurial journey, that will at some point, someday, leave you with something really meaningful. It might just take a while, and I think it's a long-term project, and we have to understand that there's no overnight success, right? Even Feedback Panda was 2 years of us running a business and scaling it from $0 to $55,000 in MRR, which is quick, but it only happened because we both had a lot of talent and a lot of experience in our respective fields.
Got it. Yeah. The reason bootstrapping is not considered seriously is, again, the notion, the outside notion, the public notion, the market notion of a business has to be scalable. High scale business is only considered a business, but a lifestyle business where you take control on how you want to scale is something that is never considered seriously. So do you think that bootstrap business can also scale that, or you need help, external help, and VCs to scale it?
Let me ask you, maybe, why would it need to scale? Right? Like, what is the goal that you have? And I think the lifestyle business, it's almost used as an insult, the phrase, right? Having a business that can sustain your lifestyle that you want. How is that a problem, right? How is that something bad that you, as a single person, as one human being in a world of billions, can create something that is digital in many cases, that is scalable to a certain degree, because it is like a digital product. It's not a physical thing you need to make, and it can sustain your lifestyle with, I don't know, somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000 MRR or whatever, adjusted to where you live. That to me is a big plus compared to not only having to reach this kind of hyper growth scale that all these VC-backed businesses aspire to have, because just a relationship with their investors kind of suggests that one of the 100 businesses that they invest in needs to be the unicorn. So everybody needs to try to be the unicorn, something that I personally would never want to do. Like, I personally would rather build a business that really slowly gets me to my MRR goal, my kind of income, revenue, whatever goal, than having to force every single day to force the business to explode, so just that some investor who made 100 bets in parallel gets their payout. I mean, where am I and where are my goals in this? I think as a bootstrapper, you have so much more control over your own outcome. And honestly, if you want to do hyperscale stuff with your business, you can always take VC money later. A proven business, and the thing is, you don't necessarily have to have hyperscale VC expectations either. We see now funding options for bootstrappers that are much less VC-like and still involve some sort of venture funding. So if you look at Earnest Capital or Indie VC or Tiny Seed, these three in particular, they give money to you. They either get a small amount of shares in your business, like significantly smaller than a VC would take, or they even get some kind of share amount of shares in your business, and then have some sort of revenue-based financing where you can buy back your own share in the business by buying out the investor. So the alignment between somebody who wants to make money on your revenue that you want to make every single month, and you who also wants to have revenue every single month, is so much higher than the alignment between you who wants to do revenue, MRR sustainably, and a VC who needs $1 billion in 2 years from now. Right? So seeing the financing options that are now coming out more and more makes me very happy, because they take lifestyle and they actually cement it. They actually want people to live in a lifestyle business. They wanted to slowly generate MRR over time, thus generating more and more income for them. And they do this with 10 businesses in parallel, expecting every single one of those to make money. To me, that is what you said it earlier, right? 9 out of 10 businesses fail. Well, yes, if the expectations are that 9 out of 10 fail and all financial instruments around it are aimed at that as well.
Got it.
But if you have systems in place that sustain all the businesses in a batch, like what you see with Tiny Seed or with Earnest Capital, like all of those businesses that they have under their wings are making money to some extent. And to me, that's what I'd like to see. A community of people where everybody makes sustainable revenue. Not just a couple who make like the billions, but everybody makes a couple tens, couple hundreds of thousands a month or a year. So much nicer. Right? I mean, that's my personal perspective, but what do you think about that?
I love that perspective. The only thing that people get caught up with is the glamour part of it, where you're not written in TechCrunch if you have a small business. Okay, but you have to trade between the peace of mind and not being answerable to a bunch of VCs who are behind you. And getting your quarterly numbers, but having a life and business under your control. So what is the trade-off? So thank you for putting forth that perspective. And so the other thing that in your book you said that within 2 years you built a niche service from a proof of concept into a thriving business that was attractive enough for a private equity firm to take it off your hands. My point is, how do you find a niche for your idea? And how deep should be the niche when you are starting out?
I can give you the definition of the audience that we had for Feedback Panda. I think it was North American online English teachers teaching through a web-based application for Chinese kid English companies, teaching English as a second language to Chinese children aged 4 to 16. Like it was extremely niche.
It couldn't get more deeper than this.
No, there was, I think, 10 qualifying factors there. And the thing is, it's super hard to find these things because they are hidden amongst so many other things, right? If you just go up one level, you remove the whole China thing, and then you have online English teachers teaching through web-based portals. And all of a sudden, you have a lot of people, like the whole LearnShip system, which is a worldwide operating business, goes through that. Or every English teacher, every language teacher, every teacher now who teaches through Zoom is now an online teacher, right? So the market is all of a sudden gigantic. So in that market exist so many particular niches already that you could go for English as a second language or physics teachers or like music teachers. And all of a sudden you see, oh yeah, they have totally different requirements to how they actually teach, right? If you teach music, all of a sudden you may need to have a really low latency bidirectional channel so that your student can play the piano and you can critique them in almost real time. If you teach physics or if you teach English, you can have a latency of like a second or two and it doesn't matter. So all of a sudden, technical reasons and constraints are giving you a completely different perspective into the niche. So what I'm always encouraging people to do is to look at, first off, if you already have an audience you want to serve, perfect, look into it, try to figure out what it consists of, right?
Right.
What other groups does this larger group consist of? And how do they differentiate themselves from each other? And how
Right.
deep can you go? Because within music teachers, like I said, you have the piano teachers, but you also have the singing teachers, right? You have the vocal teachers, and those have a completely different approach to teaching. They might just want to critique you really on the quality of certain kind of physical things. I mean, I know this because Danielle is a trained opera singer, and she's also capable of teaching voice. So
Right.
I know there's a lot of physicality and actually like seeing very clearly the physical skill of singing in other people to be able to critique them. So now all of a sudden a high definition camera may be needed. And like every niche has this little differentiation, and you can figure this out. You can look into all of these. You can make a list of your niche, of the sub niches, of the sub niches of each, and figure out. I'm currently writing an article on this. It's going to be out next week. About how to find an audience for your side business. That might help here. And it's all about figuring out which audiences you belong to, listing them, figuring out how much you like each audience. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. This is going to be a 30-second thing. Then figuring out if there's opportunity for interesting problems in each of those, scoring them all from 0 to 10, like giving them a number. Then I guess how likely people are to pay for solutions in that niche, because if you sell to I don't know B2B companies, they're more likely to pay you money than just a fan of a certain kind of sports, right? These people will be more reluctant to pay for certain things, while a business can easily write it off. And then figuring out if the market has the right size, if it's big enough for you to sustain a business, but also small enough not to be immediately encumbered by the large incumbent businesses. Like they don't want Microsoft to build a competition product with your business immediately after you launched it, right? So it's about being aware of the niche that you want to find, maybe going up and down, like niching down or niching up, depending on if it's too small or too big, and then figuring out if there's cool opportunities, if there's affinity, if you like it, if it's big enough, and finally, if they're willing to pay for solutions.
Got it. I would like to take a few audience questions here.
Let's go ahead.
So there is one from Franco Muniz, and he says, if you're building a product and suddenly you realize that there are already super similar products in the market, should you still go for it?
I think I would say yes, because your vision of what the product should be or can be will always be different from what other people's vision is, right? It's the same with everybody talks about, oh, what if somebody clones my business? Well, let them clone your business. They can clone your tech stack. They can clone your front end code or whatever, but they can never clone your vision of what you want this to be. So if you think that you have a product that can turn into something extremely unique, even though there's competition in the market by similar products, but you have a vision why you founded this, right? You have a vision why you built this in the first place, then I think you can just follow that vision, just not necessarily ignore the competition, but don't think that they're gonna that they shouldn't impact what your vision of the product is. I mean, look at all these podcasting platforms that are out there. There's Anchor FM, and there's these old school kind of audio syndication platforms. And still, Transistor FM, the new kid on the block, has been extremely successful. It's now like a 7-figure ARR business, even though there have been podcasting platforms for decades. This has existed for a while. And what did they do? Well, they went for the indie hacker and founder market, for the entrepreneur market. And I think ConvertKit is an email service provider. MailChimp existed before, and there's many email service providers out there, but ConvertKit focused on a very specific audience as well. I think it was also developers or writers, like something really specific. And from there, they outgrew their niche into something bigger and expanded into a bigger place. But honestly, if you build a product and you have a specific niche audience in mind, make it happen that only your product serves them perfectly. Then all the competition will have to do their own thing, and it doesn't matter because you found your audience.
Got it. Yeah. So this is what a disruptive innovation is, right? So you are so small and so niche that the traditional big players would not take you seriously, but over time, you would have captured a lot of their market share. Or even if you're not, as you said, you could be happy with your small market share and your small niche.
That's the thing. Right, because if you're MailChimp, you're gonna try to get every single person to wants an email list into your system because you need the market share, because you're venture backed and all these things, right? But if you're Convertkit, which is a bootstrap business, they can be picky. They can say, well, we're gonna build this project our product for these people, and it's still like, what is it, like an 8-figure business now? Like it doesn't matter. Apparently, it's still a company of I don't know, maybe 20 people, maybe even less, and they're making like tens of millions a year just from their subscription revenue. I think that's a big success. You don't need to scale indefinitely to reach success. I guess Basecamp with DHH and Jason Fried, right? The creators, of Hey.com and Basecamp, the product itself. Well, they're happy with where they are, and they're like 50 people running a multi-million-dollar business. They don't need to explode their business. They don't need to drive growth because they have reached where they want to be.
And remotely.
Remotely and without actually working their employees to death, right? The book, it doesn't have to be crazy at work. I highly recommend it just if you want to see how a sane business can work. If you're working in one that's not, like there's a lot of opportunity to make work less bothersome. It can actually be enjoyable, because if the goal is not growth for growth's sake, but if the goal is reaching a certain stage and being happy with it, work turns into something completely different. And I quite like that.
Awesome. Excellent. We'll take one more question, and this is about keeping at it, okay? Because usually entrepreneurs are asked to have patience and keep at it, but then what is the limit? For how long does one have the patience to keep at it if they do not see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? So is it 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? What is a good patience duration?
Well, it's a super hard question to answer, because I don't think there's a number. There's only a sense that a founder has for if it's still worth pursuing something or not. And personally, over the last decade, I've understood that my understanding of the market informs that feeling, right? You can understand the market completely, come to the market with a problem, and it's not just the right time. It's just a bit too early. And I think that's what we had here in Berlin with our local food platform, because now, surprise, there's a lot of local food platforms that actually did it well, that validated their product and built something meaningful. We did it in 2014. It was just too early. It did not work out at that point. And we kind of kept the company running, more or less sleeping, I guess, and then at some point pivoted into subscription boxes, so the company still exists and it's slowly growing in another market. But we understood quite quickly that even though we were building something that we thought the market could need, the market did not demand. They did not want it. And once we understood that, we kind of said, okay, let's just really stop this right now. Let's stop wasting our time. And that was a couple months after we started trying to market the whole thing. And so, okay, let's go into other things. Let's really do something else. What I would suggest is to try and have as many conversations as possible with your prospective audience. And if you feel like you're just not getting to these people, then two things may happen. Either you're actually asking the wrong questions, or you're trying to build the wrong thing. You're trying to solve the wrong problem. You have to revalidate your critical problem and your solution, or you're actually talking to the wrong people. So you have to go back even one step further and figure out, who do I want to help? These people they don't seem to want to be helped. Can I find somebody else that I could either help with what I currently have, or can I salvage what I built and turn this into something that could help somebody else? Because most online SaaS applications are pretty much like, you have a user login and you have like a dashboard, and then something happens. You can easily rebuild this into a new product if you want to serve another audience, which is probably better than spending another year trying to force a product down their throat, which they're not willing to eat or inhale. I don't know, like, I guess I would say it's like the same thing. Hire slowly and fire quickly is one of these things that you hear a lot. I would say the same thing for building. Like, build or validate slowly, but invalidate quickly. If you see it doesn't work, just go back. And I laid this out in the beginning: audience, critical problem, solution, product. This is succession, right? If your product doesn't work, go back one step and figure out if your solution isn't right. Or if your solution doesn't work, go back one step, figure out if there's a new solution, or if you're even dealing with the right problem. And if you don't get the problem right, find another problem or find another audience, which is, I think, how I laid it out in the book as well. It's like this step-by-step validation, because if you have a validated audience, validated problem, validated solution, and you're building a validated product, then you have 4 validations in one, and success is at least more likely. And if it still doesn't work, go back and figure out where you didn't validate correctly.
Got it. So what happens after, say you have validated and you have created your first version, you passed your MVP. Mm-hmm. How do you get your first customer to your first product? Or maybe, first customer and maybe the first 50 customers or so, if it is a consumer product.
It's going to be very different for each business, because every business has a different audience, but every audience is a community in some way, right? Even though people who like warm showers, my really lame example from earlier, that is in itself a community, because you will find a blog dedicated to showers or shower heads or like water temperature differences or something like this. There's going to be a niche community somewhere where people communicate. And I guess in business, we call this the water cooler, right? The area where everybody goes to when they want to have a coffee or when they want to get some water, where they chat about their professional lives. And you have the water cooler in every single community. You just need to find it. And that's a great thing about going audience first. The approach of figuring out your audience and then the problem and solution and product later is that you already know where those people are. Because if you validate your audience, I guess if you follow the steps that I laid out earlier, if you find your affinity for it and the opportunity and size and that kind of stuff, you have looked into this. You have found the forums they hang out in. You have found the Facebook groups they may hang out in, the Twitter community in which they are, or maybe there's actual like institutions where they have a newsletter going out every month, right? Plumbers, there are plumbing associations in every single state of the United States and in Europe and every single country. You can subscribe to the Plumbing Associations of New Jersey's newsletter, and you get new information about plumbing every single month. Well, this is a community, and you can either advertise on the community, or you can just really talk to the people sending out the newsletter and tell them what you're building and ask them if that's interesting for them to put a segment on. Or find a Facebook community, you embed yourself, you start communicating with people without actually forcing them into your product, but just really to establish yourself as an expert in the field. Because the moment you become part of a tribal community, and a tribe, I guess, is characterized by people who have the same interests, they share the same interests, they follow the same people, and they hang out in the same location and are highly interconnected. Well, once you are in this kind of tribe, if you elevate your own reputation, people will start listening to you. And how can you elevate your own reputation? Well, by providing value without taking value. And I think that's what I've done without really wanting to do it. But now in retrospect, I figured out that's what I did in providing a new blog post and a new newsletter and a new podcast for free every single week for now almost a year. It is not surprising that people who followed my journey for this whole year, every week they got something. And when I finally had something I could sell, which was my book, they jumped onto this, right? I sold 350 copies within the first 24 hours, not because people necessarily really wanted to read this book immediately. I hope that some would, but people really wanted to give back. And that is something you can leverage in the community, because if you establish yourself as the plumbing expert in the plumber chat, the plumber telegram group, I don't know, then people will listen to you, and you can find people who want to go on a beta, who want to sign up for your beta a couple of weeks after you started really giving value. You said, I'm trying to build this. This is something that I'm trying to help this community with. I'd be happy if you join, but you don't have to. It's still completely optional. You don't have to pay. And if you become a customer later, there will be a hefty discount because you were one of those people that made it happen. You can be like sociable and still get people into your product. Just don't do it immediately. When you join a community, provide first and take much later. I think Reddit is notorious for that. If you find a Reddit, a subreddit somewhere on the topic, on the community that you want to sell to, join and stick around for a couple months, because if you put a link to your product in there within the first couple of weeks, you're out of there immediately. So Communities will protect themselves, right? And you need to be a part of them. But that's how we found our own customers. Let me finish with this. Our first customer was a person that clicked on a link that Danielle had posted in a response to some message in a Facebook group for online English teachers. But people asked, so how do you do the feedback? How do you deal with your feedback? And Danielle said, well, I use Feedback Panda, put the link in there. And that's how the first customers came. In fact, that's how all our customers came, because it was a tribe. And the moment they had something valuable, they were sharing it with each other. And all our marketing has been word of mouth. I think we paid like 200 euros altogether for paid advertising in the whole history of Feedback Panda.
That's an interesting point that you made. So you said that in the previous examples that you shared, building community and building trust in the relevant community is an exercise that you could begin much before the product is being built, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you could start it right now. You have to start it right now, because you want to be in these communities and established in as long as possible, because that is a reputational journey. Yeah.
Got it. So you don't have to build the product and then become active, but much as early as possible, isn't it?
And the thing is, if you join a community, let's say you join some subreddit on some obscure hobby that people have. Well, if you observe these people communicating every single day, you will figure out what their commonly held critical problems are. Right? Because if everybody complains, let's say gamers complain about, I don't know what game to play next. I don't really know. And I tried this, but I didn't like it. Nobody can tell me I like these games. What should I play next? Well, isn't that a critical problem for somebody in a gaming community, right? And if you see this every single day, people complaining about this, well, then you know what to build, because you don't need to have an idea when you join a community. In fact, I would completely put your ideas aside and just really observe the community for what they need. Because it could be that they need what your idea can provide, but that is a gamble. By going with what they say they need, what they are complaining about, you have a much higher chance of reaching them and building this kind of market, building this audience, and then maybe later you can build whatever you wanted to build in the first place, but maybe you don't need to, because the thing that you build following their complaints and following their critical problem may just be the thing that actually makes it a big and sustainable and growing business that you want, right? It doesn't have to be your first idea, but it should be something that really helps the people you want to empower, and you can only find that by observing them and listening to them complaining about their problems.
Got it. So let's move to the next stage. So you bootstrapped your marketing. You did not spend a lot. You were creative. You built your community, but over time you went beyond your first few customers, and now you want to also evaluate the market around it, right? The market potential around it. So how do you decide the size of the market? And interestingly, you had a phrase, Goldilocks Zone. So maybe if you could spend some time on market and Goldilocks, would be great.
Yeah, market size is an interesting problem, because usually if you want to build a big business, the bigger the market, the better, right? It's very easy. If there's a big market, awesome. Is there a bigger market? Let's go over there. But I feel for bootstrapped founders in particular, for businesses that supposedly grow slowly, or it doesn't have to be slow, but sustainably over a longer period of time, and they don't exhibit the hockey stick, but really almost linear, or at least not exponential, but maybe geometric growth. Like, let's not be too math specific about this here. If you want to have a market that can sustain your business, you want it to be big enough. That obviously is the case, right? But it doesn't have to be infinitely big, because the moment you get into the waters of and I said this earlier, where Microsoft could build a competing product and it would be economically purposeful for them to build this, then you're in a much too big market, at least for starting out. You can always build a business like let's say Convertkit, right? They built a small product, they grew, they now they make I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars. Of course, they've grown into a bigger market, but they didn't start in one. So the Goldilocks zone is, I guess, from the fairy tale, it's not too hot, it's not too cold. Same goes for the market. It's not too big that you have these gigantic businesses with a lot of marketing money that could easily outspend you just by throwing a rounding error for them could be a couple $1 million in a yearly marketing spend. You could not afford this as a bootstrapper who doesn't have any funding, right? So that is way too big. But there's also way too small, Because if you want to sell a product to all the Star Trek fans in Berlin, right? I mean, we have 4 million people. There's probably, I don't know, like 10, 20,000 diehard Star Trek fans in the city. Still, that's not a big market. So first off, what are you going to sell to them? Again, a very stupid example, but it's a highly specific niche. Star Trek fans in a city that also like coffee, something like this. Not going to be a big market. So you're not going to be able to sustain a product that maybe is going to have some competition at some point. So you need to find a market that is big enough to sustain, just from purchasing your product, a business that you feel is safe to build and is reliable for growth for you for the next couple of years. For us at Feedback Panda, when we started, Danielle was looking into the amount of teachers that were in her Facebook groups. It was a good indicator for the size of the market. That was like around 5,000 people, maybe 7,000 people there at this point. And that was 2017. A couple weeks later, there was 10,000 people in this group. And a year later, there was 20, 30,000 people in this group. It was pretty clear that we were looking at a highly growing, fast-growing market. And that gave us a lot of confidence that if this market continues to grow or gets stagnant at some point, here's 50,000 people that each could pay us $10 a month. That is pretty solid. And we ended up only kind of serving 5,000 of them when we sold the business. Still, they were paying 10 to 15 bucks a month, though 55K MRR. So that was okay for 2 people. And it was only 2 people, right? It was only the 2 of us. And maybe this actually brings us to Franco's second question that he just posed on YouTube there, because I find this a good opportunity to talk about this. We were two people team at this point, not a one-man team, but 2. But honestly, almost the same, right? Because if you don't have an actual group of employees taking over work for you, even if you split it halfway, it's still overwhelming. And we had 5,000 customers. There was a lot of anxiety and stress in our lives, at least in mine. And I talk about this a lot because you do want to make sure that you don't get a panic attack or a breakdown or a burnout from your business, which is supposed to be your lifestyle business. I don't think burnout is a lifestyle. That is necessarily something you want to go. But if you were a one-man team, and deciding between selling the business, hiring, or raising capital, well, it really depends on what you want. If you want to build a business that will nourish you forever and you're going to work in it, you're going to work on it, or you just own it, well, then you hire. Because hiring in a company means like you find somebody to do your work for you, right? So if you build a sellable business, and I highly recommend the building a sellable business approach. I highly recommend reading the book Built to Sell for the business advice in it, and by John Warlow, because building a sellable business means building a business that other people want to buy. And other people want to buy a business that is highly automated, that is good, well documented, that can be easily taken over. And a sellable business has one key characteristic. That means that the CEO of the business or the person doing the operations is replaceable, highly replaceable. And if you make yourself highly replaceable, well, then you have 2 options. Either you don't replace yourself and you just keep working and enjoying the fruits of your labor, or you replace yourself with somebody who can do your job, pay them a bit, and still make more money from them doing your job. So that is always an option, right? Sellable business means you don't have to sell, you can sell, and you can replace yourself. All of these options are valid. I honestly don't know much about raising capital after the fact. We've seen this a couple times. I think over the past year or 2 that bootstrap businesses have started raising money at a certain point just to amplify growth. I think 1Password is an example for that. They were bootstrapped all the way, and then they decided at some point to just raise like $10 million to really get into the, I guess, the business market and trying to promote their business product or something. It happens. But honestly, out of the options of selling or continuing to run your business, I would rather pick one of these 2 than raising VC capital, because you've chugged along nicely building your business until that point, and now all of a sudden you have a board. And not only do you have a board, you have investors who really, really want you to make changes, because your linear growth bootstrap business is not going to cut it necessarily if you raise, unless you raise this kind of bootstrapper-friendly capital. But if you've been bootstrapping for a while and you are somewhere in the 50 to 100K MRR range, and you are a solo founder or a group of 2, the funding options are pretty dire at this point. It's still mostly the initial phase or the much later phase. So it's going to be tough. But let's talk about selling your business, because that's something that produces a lot of, I would call it, financial security immediately, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a business that, I don't know, makes $500,000 a year. The multiples for selling this thing is always going to be somewhere between, I don't know, 1.5 and 5 times that. Just on average, it really depends on the business you've built and how it works, what the market is looking like. But
1.5 would be way too less, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be quite little, but it really depends. If you build a business that doesn't have high margins, I mean, you have, I don't know, 500,000 in revenue, but you have expenses around 350 or something like that, because you're actually like sub-licensing or some complicated and expensive stuff in there, or you have to pay out people. I don't know, right? It depends. Mm-hmm. Then it can easily be just a 1.5 or 2x of that. But often you have 4x, 5x, 6x, maybe 10x if it's in a super explosive market. So let's say you get super lucky and you sell this business for $4 million or something.
Right.
Minus taxes and all this kind of stuff, you're looking at $2 to $3 million that you have now all of a sudden.
Right.
That is interesting. Right, that's definitely an interesting situation for you as a founder, because now, first off, you're personally secure for a while. You can invest most of this, live off the dividends or whatever, and all of a sudden, you have this kind of post-economic state of mind. I heard a very successful founder talk about this, because now you can make different decisions. Start a new business, sure. Invest like a couple tens of thousands of dollars into the first couple months. Hire somebody, not a problem. You couldn't have done this in your bootstrap business, but you definitely can when you sold. So I would assume if you don't want to build this into something that you have to or want to be running for the next decade or two, sell it. Sell it to somebody who wants to do this, wants to continue growing it, and you can elevate yourself to this next step and build the next thing if you want to.
And build the next thing that you love about, and you can consciously make choices on what you want to do for the rest of your life.
And so most founders experience something during their process of building a business that they then want to fix with their next business. I think you have this. If you look at Rob Walling, who founded Drip and organized MicroConf and Tiny Seed, right? The accelerator, like he built a SaaS product, he built lots of SaaS products, and he figured out, funding is a problem. And now he's built the fund for Bootstrap SaaS products and a conference for people to learn how to get their bootstrap businesses off the ground. It's always the same. People build something, figure out something during their journey didn't work out as well, and then they build a solution to that next. Something didn't work. The next thing is going to be a solution to that. The serial founder, that's how it happens, right? Because people just they run into walls and they make a mental note, tear down this wall with the next business, and then they do that, and then they run into a new wall. It's really nice. It's a never-ending source of new ideas. It's cool.
But the paradox here is, and most people who are not entrepreneurs always imagine this, that financial independence could be the key. If he has already made millions after selling his business, why would he want to go through the rigors again of building something instead of retiring in an island? Okay,
because we need purpose in life. Honestly, when we sold the business, and when I was just like, I was running the business 24/7 every single day. I was there answering customers, building things. So it's super energetic. And then all of a sudden you just run into this wall and nothing happens. Okay. It was like, I was sitting at home with nothing to do because all of the purpose that I had in life for the last 2 years was in this company that now was run by somebody else. And you're in this void. You don't know what to do. Do I just play World of Warcraft now? Or do I watch like old Star Trek reruns on TV? Is this what my life is going to be? If you are somebody who wants to help people, you need to find something that gives that to you, some purpose where you can do this. And if you're an entrepreneur, that is, I think, the core tenet, right? The core principle of entrepreneurship is empowering other people. It's not really about the money. The money is great, and it's great to be financially secure. It definitely feels good, but it feels even better to know that you're helping other people get to the exact same point. So I feel that, great segue. Let's talk about this question. Let's talk about how do you find these communities if you're not in them, if you're not already part of a niche or a community.
Right.
I would wager that you, Manuel, are already part of communities. You just don't know it yet. I've ran this experiment with a couple of my mentees. I said, from tomorrow on, everything you do, you take a note of what kind of audience, what kind of community could be around this. You start your day, you wake up, take a hot or cold shower, you have your coffee, and then, coffee, right? There are coffee aficionados all over the planet, like people who import the finest coffee from somewhere, who want to learn how to get the right temperature with the right pressure and the right amount of, beans and at what kind of granularity they need to be ground. There's a community. And then you start your commute, you go to your job, you get into your car. Okay, there's a lot of communities around cars, people who like car hi-fi audio systems, or people who, who optimize routes, where to go. I'm trying to come up with weird audiences, but just really step through your day and write down whenever you think you're part of a community. You look at your apartment, you see your computer. Okay, you're a software engineer. Or you see your gaming mouse. Okay, you're a gamer. You really like computer games. There's a community, and there's a lot of sub-communities in there. Or you have an aquarium. Oh, now all of a sudden you're an aquarist. You like to build aquariums, or you like to run aquariums. There's a community that has problems. You come home from your job. You turn on the TV. You turn to like a sports channel. You're a sports fan. There's now fantasy football. There's a community. How do these people solve their remote of communication problems now that people can't meet and hang out in the bar anymore, that kind of stuff? You are part of lots of communities already. And I think by consciously going through your day and taking notes, not just who you are already in a community with, but who could also be a community around things that you haven't thought about just yet. Podcasting equipment, right? There's a community. Like just being on YouTube, there's lots of communities in there. I have a problem with this, honestly, for myself, because wherever I look, I see communities. It's not so easy, right? Because you can't just enjoy things for what they are. My mind always jumps to, okay, what audience is this at this point? You can train yourself to find this, and you make a note and you list them up, and you start ranking them to who you want to help, and if there's opportunity, and if they're big enough, and all this stuff. And you will see some rise to the top. You will see some that are better for you to build a business in. And if you don't find it in yourself, go to your significant other. What is their job? What do they like? What hobbies do they have? What hobbies do your parents have? What hobbies do your siblings have? Your friends? Just explore outside of yourself, always where there's a direct connection. So you can actually ask those people, what kind of critical problems do you see in your industry? What's the day like in the life of a plumber? That's where this example came from. Like in the family, there's a plumber. So I know plumbers have plumbing problems. Hence, I looked into this. I don't want to build something for plumbers. I'm just making this as an example. I'm just putting it out there. You can find out a lot about an audience like this by just going and talking to people and being aware of these people existing, and then just really diving deep into this industry. Super enjoyable because you learn so much and you can apply these things in different industries. We can talk about this, I think, another time, because I see that we're getting to the end. But audience exploration is a very, very rewarding thing. And if you do it in a structured way, and I'm going to drop this blog post next week with a more structured approach, you can find a really good initial audience to build a business for.
Excellent. So Manuel says, thank you for that. And as I said, I'm being mindful of your time as well. But I just want to ask one last question before we close this. And the question is, you seem to have an advantage of being a techie, okay? And then that's what you got started with. How about people who have ideas, but they're not techies themselves? So what kind of route could they take for building a software product?
Okay, the greatest thing about living in 2020, apart from the crazy pandemic and that the world is exploding and stuff, is that we are in the middle of the no-code movement. Like, the building things has never been easier. And funny enough, no code is a thing that appears every now and then. And like there used to be products in the 90s and 2000s that were essentially no code products, but only now have we started to understand that it's not just about building fancy websites without having to build code, but it's about connecting things. Right? Now we have services like Zapier and Integromat and if this and that, these things that are the glue between other no-code products. I would highly recommend, if you're not a technical founder, if you're not technical at all, and if you don't want to learn to code, which I would still recommend, but still, if you don't want to do that, look into the no-code community. Look into MakerPad, the platform where you can find a lot of tutorials, many of them free, and where you don't have to become part of the community, but it's still recommended to be part of this community, because if you are going into the no-code space, there's no better community for that. And look for no-code websites, newsletters, and tutorials. You can build pretty much everything that at least a prototype of your product would need without needing to code a single thing. Mostly, if code is involved, it's just really glue code that you need to copy and paste from one position into the other. That's how these no-code tools interact mostly. But most of them interact through just clicking connect with, and then you connect these two things. And now when something happens here, something else happens there. Learn how to use no-code tooling. And maybe, if time allows, look into how to code just a little bit. Just try to understand how code works. You don't have to be able to do it. You just really have to be able to instruct somebody to do it for you at some point. Because once no code is not enough anymore, you will need to get a coder. Or if it's enough, then you never have to. But no code, that is, no code, in one word, is something that I would Google immediately if you want to understand how to build something without needing to code.
But could you bypass this process at all? If say you develop cold feet while you're trying to build something for the first time, could you just outsource this, or you hire a developer or something?
Yes, but I think it's very risky because it's expensive. The great thing about the no-code tools is that if you want to get a Webflow account or just a website going, it's like $10 a month. And you can build in a Zapier, one of these glue code tools, subscription. You get pretty much everything for free until you hit a certain kind of amount of usage. And that won't be until you have paying customers. So you pretty much use it for free until you have revenue. I would say if you want to build something, you always should prototype it anyway. And having somebody build a prototype that you then throw away is a waste of money, both for their work and also because you could have actually built this prototype much quicker using no-code tooling. And maybe you can hire a no-code expert, like a no-code developer, to wire your no-code tools together for you much more efficiently than you can, right? It's not, you don't have to either get a coder or do everything by yourself. There's still no-code experts out there. And they're not as expensive as coders because they're not wasting hours building the thing that somebody else had already built. So I would say, particularly for prototypes, you're just really trying to fit something together and see how people react to it. So no-code would be my number one go-to at this point for that.
Got it. I think the audience would also appreciate if you could write a blog on how to build for non-techies. So exactly what you just mentioned, maybe a little more in-depth to how to get started. So you mentioned a few things like Zapier, Integromat, Webflow and stuff like that. But if you could just string these thoughts together and write a blog post, I'm sure that's going to get popular.
I think that's a good idea. It's definitely somewhere on my list. Like when we sold the company, I made this list of blog posts that I wanted to write, and I think it's now at 200 titles, of which I've written about maybe 50 or 60 at this point. So there's still some unwritten stuff, but I think it's a good idea. The only problem I have is that with that in particular is that the market is changing quite a bit all the time. Right? It's one of these things where you mentioned a particular technology, and it will probably still be around because many of these no-code businesses are VC funded, and they have a lot of money because people have understood if we get into the building blocks, then everything built on top of them, we can have the trickle-down economics going on there. So these tools are well funded, but I would still, I like the idea, and I'm probably going to do it. It's a question of when I get to do it. There's so much stuff to do, so much to write. But thanks for the idea. I'm definitely gonna look into this.
Well, thank you. This brings us to the end of an insightful conversation with Arvid. So all the pursuing that I was trying to do was well worth it because, as I said, he bypassed all my initial impressions of him, and also very nice to see so many audience questions here. So I think they all followed you from your Twitter account. But Arvind, again, thanks a lot, and appreciate your time and energy.
Thanks so much, Ravi. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
See you then. Bye-bye, everybody.
See ya. Thanks, everybody.